Donald Trump has another threat for Canada.
With our economy under threat from abroad, Canadians have made a choice to focus on what we can control.
The U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's comments about one of Canada's most valued natural resources.
We have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north, and they have essentially a very large faucet.
The progress we've made breaking down internal trade barriers in Canada.
And Donald Trump has pledged to bring more water to drought-stricken California from Canada.
Donald Trump says America needs more water. Not someday, not hypothetically, now. He pointed north and described it plainly. Vast snowcaps, endless rivers, a country sitting on what he called a massive faucet. In his words, millions of gallons flowing unused while the American West dries out. He suggested that water from Canada, particularly from British Columbia, could be redirected south, through Oregon, into California. A practical solution, he implied, to a growing crisis. Canada's response was immediate, firm, almost blunt. That water is not for sale. It is not available for diversion. It is not open to negotiation. And while some officials added the familiar diplomatic phrase, "never say never," the message underneath was unmistakable. This will not happen. Across the western United States, water systems are under stress in ways officials once believed were decades away. Reservoirs are shrinking faster than predicted. Snowpack is thinner and melts earlier each year. Rivers that once sustained cities and agriculture are struggling to meet basic demand. California, Arizona, and Nevada are already enforcing restrictions. Farmers are abandoning land. Cities are preparing residents for permanent limits. What used to be a cyclical drought is becoming a structural condition. And that reality is forcing Washington to confront a question it has avoided for years. If the United States cannot sustain itself with its own water, where does it turn? Attention has quietly shifted north. Canada holds one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet, lakes that stretch beyond the horizon, rivers that still flow freely, glaciers that continue to feed entire ecosystems. Nearly 20% of the world's surface fresh water lies within Canadian borders. For decades, that abundance was treated as a geographic fact, not a strategic asset. But scarcity has a way of changing how resources are viewed. Mark Carney understood that immediately. His response wasn't framed as hostility. It wasn't emotional. It was structural. Canada's water, he said, is not a commodity. It is not a bargaining chip, and it will not be folded into trade frameworks where demand and pressure dictate outcomes. That distinction matters because history is clear on this point. Once a resource enters trade agreements, it stops being protected by principle. It becomes governed by contracts, by arbitration, by economic leverage. And when the world's largest economy gains access to a critical input, it doesn't relinquish it easily. The United States isn't wrong to worry. The Colorado River no longer reaches the ocean. Lake Mead has fallen to record lows. Climate change has accelerated evaporation, reduced snowpack, and reshaped rainfall patterns across the West. What was once manageable scarcity is turning into long-term imbalance. And when survival is at stake, the language of diplomacy begins to change. Requests become expectations, cooperation becomes obligation, and eventually, refusal is framed as obstruction. That's why Canada's position goes beyond water levels. It's about precedent. If Canada agrees to divert water today, what happens tomorrow when demand increases? What happens when drought conditions worsen, or when other countries point to that agreement and demand similar access? In that world, water stops being a public trust. It becomes a global commodity, priced and pressured like oil or gas. Those conversations are already happening behind closed doors. American lobby groups have floated proposals for massive diversion projects, pipelines spanning thousands of miles, infrastructure designed to permanently link Canadian watersheds to American consumption. Supporters describe these plans as bold engineering, visionary, necessary. Critics describe them as irreversible. Because water systems are not modular,
You can't remove millions of gallons from a watershed without consequences. Rivers don't reset. Lakes don't refill on command. Ecosystems adapt slowly, if they adapt at all. Once altered, they often collapse in ways that can't be undone within political timelines. Canadians understand this instinctively. To them, the idea isn't just impractical, it's dangerous. Water diverted south doesn't come back north, and the long-term ecological costs would be borne by communities that never consented to the trade. Carney has been consistent in his framing. America's water crisis, he argues, cannot be solved by shifting the burden north. Real solutions lie in conservation, infrastructure reform, and long-term planning, not in externalizing scarcity, not in exporting responsibility. This is where the conflict sharpens. From Washington's perspective, Canada's refusal can be framed as withholding help. From Ottawa's perspective, the request itself represents a risk that cannot be managed once accepted. One side speaks the language of partnership, the other hears vulnerability. Neither position is easily softened. Meanwhile, Canada is choosing a different path. Instead of monetizing water, it is investing in protection. Billions are being directed toward climate resilience, watershed conservation, and infrastructure designed to preserve long-term supply. The objective isn't profit, it's continuity, ensuring that future generations inherit stability rather than scarcity. The message is simple but firm. A country that loses control of its water loses control of its future. But the pressure isn't going away. As droughts intensify and populations grow, water will become the defining resource of global politics. Countries with surplus will face demands. Countries without will face desperation. And in that environment, even polite negotiations can evolve into leverage. The United States holds immense military and economic power, but in this arena, Canada possesses something equally valuable: time, stability, and water. There are no tariffs announced, no sanctions threatened, no declarations of confrontation. This is not a loud conflict, but the stakes are enormous. Water determines food security, energy production, urban survival, influence. Whoever controls it shapes outcomes far beyond their borders. Canada's refusal sends a signal not just to Washington, but to the world. Some resources are too fundamental to trade away. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be redrawn. What happens next remains uncertain. Future American leaders may push harder. Climate conditions may deteriorate faster than expected. Public pressure inside the United States may intensify. Each of these forces will test Canada's resolve. For now, the position remains unchanged. Canada's water stays in Canada. Because this story isn't just about rivers and reservoirs, it's about sovereignty in an age of scarcity. And as climate change accelerates, the value of fresh water will only rise. Today, it's a discussion. Tomorrow, it may be a demand. And when that moment comes, the decisions being made now will matter more than anyone realizes.